Hi there, Zelda here, and welcome to a Pick-a-Pile or Pick-a-Palmstone, I guess, tarot reading for the week ahead. As you may have seen if you watched my last week ahead reading, I really love these Pick-a-Pile readings, and I'm going to try and do one every week for the most part, knowing that sometimes life gets hectic and I might not be able to do every single week, but right now that's the goal every week. And you get to kind of self divination, intuit your own divination for the week ahead by following your intuition. And you're absolutely welcome to read all of the piles, but I encourage you to kind of test your own intuition, take what resonates, leave the rest. And we'll be using 3 different decks today. The 3 different decks are the messages from your animal guides, the Hollow Valley Tarot deck, and the Poesis Oracle deck. I have picked out the 3 different piles. So for pile number 1, we're going to be using this blue apatite palmstone. Their name is Cielo. For pile number 2, we're going to be working with Arusha, who is an aquamarine palmstone. And for pile number 3, we're going to be working with Raphael, who is a malacholla palmstone. So, just to review, Cielo, pile 1, Arusha, pile 2, and Raphael, pile 3. So, you can, I'll put the timestamps in the bio or in the blurb about the video. So if you did not pick pile 1 with Cielo, I invite you now to skip ahead. We are going to get started. So, if you picked pile 1, these are your cards. So, I'm going to speak to the tarot card in context of the other cards. So the Hollow Valley Tarot card, I'm also going to read the phrase of intention from the guidebook. I will eventually be doing a review on this deck. It is a deck that I backed on Kickstarter. If you know me in real life or you've been following for a little while, you know that I love Kickstarter tarot decks. I always have one on its way to me in the mail. I have very low impulse control, and so I always have one. And this one, I love the deck, but I oftentimes, even though you will see that there are 2 black and white decks here, I generally gravitate towards really colorful decks. So yeah, this is a little more unusual for me. Ooh, I'm gonna spritz I love using this spray that I make called Platinum Dragon with flower essences and stuff to drop into the reading. Okay, so your tarot card, pile 1, is the King of Swords. Now, one of the things I love about this deck is there's tons of different imagery. There's these hands clasping, keys, flowers, this person kind of walking gracefully forward. With the King of Swords, the kings are these exalted leaders of the suits, of the individual suits. They are not gendered. Tarot cards are not gendered, in my opinion, because each card is intended to apply to everyone. So the King of Swords is this... the swords are cognition and the mind and air. And so this is fire and air, a double elemental. All of the court cards are double elementals in the style that I read them in. And so this feels really like fire is stoked by air. And this is aligned cognitive leadership that is not cognitively dominated. It's kind of like a very balanced energy. I think of leaders who are going to take the lead and take control, but are not going to do that by trampling the people around them. I see this person kind of like walking bravely forward. I see the rose really blooming and being open to kind of like taking up space in that way. As well as with roses, I oftentimes think of receiving messages from guides. Smelling something or smelling roses, a lot of times people associate that with getting messages from their guardian angels. Angelic frequency can be associated with roses. And I also see this kind of like clasping of hands. And I think of like empowered leaders don't feel the need oftentimes to do everything on their own. They're not going to shy away from responsibility, but they're not insecure in the way that they're going to not take support from others. So in the context of the other cards, the spider is your animal card, and it says, trust the creative spark you're feeling and express it through writing stories that inspire and enlighten. And the Poesis Oracle deck is connect. And so, especially with the King of Swords, like I even see that little parchment scroll, is a really good card for writing, for sharing your story. And it says here, right, the spider, express it through writing stories that inspire and enlighten. And I think with this card especially, right, I'm seeing just some similarities in images. The clasping hands and the connecting the dots or connecting fingers in that way, that sometimes when we share our story, it is a huge act of vulnerability. It is a way that we connect and make sense of our life and relate that to the people around us. It is a way that we are inspired and inspiring. It can be a healing process for us. It can also be like claiming your expertise by writing about something that you know about, saying, I know enough about this that I want to share that with the world. The King of Swords energy feels very much like writing in a way that feels empowering. And when I see the spider and I see it connect, I think of like the spider and how they spin this web that's like the integrity of it is held together by all of these like different points of contact, and that it kind of needs to be like held out. Like if you've ever like touched a part or a side and the web kind of like collapses into this kind of like sticky, I don't love that, but it's important. The substance is what holds it up, but that it's kind of delicate in this way, and that maybe there's like a teasing out of a story, or if you are working on a story, maybe taking a step back and looking at all of the different pieces and how they fit together. Let's see what your phrase of intention is. So for the King of Swords, and again, this is from the Hollow Valley Guidebook. My words are weapons/tools. I choose them carefully and wield them with skill. My words are weapons/tools. I choose them carefully and I wield them with skill. So this also can be like not shying away from the reality that words are powerful. They very much have the capacity to build things up or tear things down. And when I see this kind of encouragement to use words in a way that is inspiring or enlightening, this feels very much like also having reverence for the fact that whatever you are working on or crafting, your story, whether it is written or spoken, very much matters, and taking that very sincerely and also being very respectful of the stories around. Cielo means sky in Spanish, and this is the one that you chose. And one of the messages that feels like it's coming through is this expansiveness. Like it means sky, but it also can mean like heaven or firmament, this kind of expansiveness of what is possible, and is possibly like as you kind of step in and claim your story and work on either a maybe a larger project than you thought was possible. Like the phrase that comes to mind is like the sky is the limit. Like don't put limitations, don't put a ceiling or a cap on what is possible. If you had a dream to write a book, maybe it's time to carve out a little bit of space and start plugging away at crafting that. If you would like to start a blog or start writing more about your narrative or submit an essay to a peer-reviewed publication, if that is your, like, if you're an academic writer, don't let yourself kind of minimize what is possible. The King of Swords encourages to wield those powerful tools with respect and reverence for yourself and for others around you. Okay. I think that is all of the messages coming through for pile one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now we are going to be moving on to pile two. Pile two with Arusha. Arusha is aquamarine and has very like Atlantean energy to me. Feels like I hear kind of like this kind of collective wisdom that arises, as well as like even like watery associated energy. Let's see what your cards are. Okay, so the Queen of Swords reversed. I didn't have any reversals in this deck, so it's always super interesting to me when this happens. And it oftentimes will happen in these settings where I'm doing like a channeled reading or a message where I like can't really go back and fix it because I'm already like on the air with you guys, you know? And so it's kind of interesting that happens. I'm going to read it and I'm also going to honor that I wasn't planning on that, but it does make sense in the context of these different cards. So the Queen of Swords reversed. The Queen of Swords to me feels very important that I'm going to just mention what these other cards are and then tell you about how I feel like they are fitting together and what messages I'm receiving that could be supportive. Your animal card is the dog. And as much as I love dogs, I do think it's important to read the information here. It says your loyalty and faithfulness is misplaced by serving too many masters. Your loyalty and faithfulness is misplaced by serving too many masters. And then the Poesis Oracle deck card is blockage. Okay, so with the Queen of Swords, the word that really comes to mind is boundaries. The Queen of Swords feels like it comes up as an energy or an archetype of being able to very clearly see what is needed for self and other, and being able to act in accordance with discernment, with clarity, with courage to say what is needed to be said, and really speaking your mind in a way that is self-empowering. The queens feel like energy of internal to external, whereas the kings feel like that they're the kind of external iteration in some ways. The queens can absolutely be leaders. And this is not, like I said with the king, if you were watching the previous one, but since it's a skip to your own, I'm just going to repeat it. The core cards in tarot are, I do not read them as gendered cards. I do not read them as gendered people in your life. I do not think that there is any card in the tarot deck that is not for every single person. So whether you are non-binary, whether you are trans, whether you do identify as a woman or a man, or any neo-gender and neo-pronoun kind of identity, this is not even agender, right? This is not intended to be for you or not for you. It's really, I encourage like building a different relationship, and there are different decks where you can have ones that are totally not called Page Knight Queen King, but I do encourage in the meantime, kind of as we're using some of these decks, feel into like what that means for you. And I don't even necessarily read them as like the divine feminine or divine masculine iteration, but I do see the Queen of Swords as being this quality of like, how is your inner life supported by the boundaries and relationships that you utilize to set discerning boundaries for what is necessary. And when it comes up in tandem with, like, especially in reverse, right, it feels a little out of balance. And when it comes up with this blockage and that your your faithfulness and loyalty are misplaced by serving too many masters, that feels like a pretty clear message. Of course, take it or leave it, do what feels right for you. But in this one, I'm really struck by seeing this. It like looks almost like those kind of like pinball where it like shoots up. And I think of like, what is stopping you first of all. This also looks like a clear blockage throat area of like, what is one stopping you from speaking your truth? What narrative, like what's spinning around, like ping 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 around in your brain that is keeping you perhaps trapped or in relational dynamics that do not feel valuable to yourself, that do not feel like they are serving you and who you want to become. Sometimes we stay in relational dynamics because we are habituated to do that. Sometimes we stay in relational dynamics because we feel unsafe leaving them. Sometimes we feel like we don't deserve better, or that it's the end of the world if a relationship ends. And this isn't saying like go out and break up with your partner. Like that's not what I'm saying here. Or like excommunicate someone. And if that's what you hear from this, great. That means that that's something that you're needing, if that's really what you're hearing. But what I'm saying like very clearly is like sometimes we don't set a boundary with an employer and say, hey, actually, that's not within my availability. I said I couldn't work that day, because we're afraid of getting punished, or we feel like I'm not allowed to say no. We don't ask a partner or set a boundary. One that comes up is like, not saying no to being intimate with someone because it feels like, oh, that's what this other person wants, or, oh, that feels like something I should do, but actually you don't want to, even if you said you did before, and that's not actually honoring your own self-consent and your own boundaries. And this is not to blame anyone who's been in situations where their consent has actually been violated. This is a much more nuanced view of consent, that actually we are really responsible for maintaining and holding our own boundaries and exploring that inner balance, right? I see this kind of balancing the scales, right? The roses, I see the thorns of having boundaries that protect that blossom. Let's see what the phrase of intent is. I am the discerning director of my destiny. I am the discerning director of my destiny. Taking responsibility and accountability for setting the boundaries that you need in your life. Being discerning, knowing that you are the one you are your own master. You are your own captain. You are your own soulmate in a way, right? This is, I think of like the adoration, right, of a dog, and like the attentiveness, and how if you are doing that externally and wondering why you're not getting any of that back, part of that feels like the boundaries of like, give yourself some of that love that you are pouring outward. Redirect that back towards yourself. With Arusha, let's see if Arusha has any messages to share. Getting like some water, some images of water, and also like taking space. Like I almost see like the moat around a castle or something as a boundary, and like think about like having realizing that a boundary is necessary and not saying that, like, since I didn't set that boundary or have that conversation in the moment, that means that I don't get to set that or have that. We always get the opportunity to go back and revisit conversations and renegotiate boundaries. It is not our responsibility to or possibility to be perfect, especially with boundary setting. We get to set a boundary, realize it's not the boundary we need, and reset the boundary. We get to set a boundary, have it not be respected, and address that in the moment or afterwards, right? And so I just think of, like, with feeling that water, the message from Arusha feels like give yourself boundaries that allow you to feel like submerged in the containment of your own energy. Don't let your energy get too diluted by pouring that out towards others. Also, it feels like a message is a little bit non-linear, which sometimes happens, right? So it's not a super clear message, but I'm feeling this sense of, one, if it resonates with you, like, and you need a break to have a conversation, like that feeling of like settling into a bath where you like put your ears below the water so that you can hear, like, can't hear anything outside, but you can hear like your own breathing and your own heartbeat. That, like, what are practices, if you're working on boundaries, that bring you and call you back into yourself, where you can really focus on you and have a real big clarity of energy, so that you can really know what you want and then be able to take that back externally and set those boundaries. The first thing to knowing about boundaries is being able to clarify that internally and know what is actually needed. Okay, I think that is that. Thank you so much, Pile 2. So, pile number 3. I do not know genuinely how this happened. Like, I set my tarot decks so that they are not having reversals for some of these spreads, and now last pile had a reversal and this one had a reversal. So, like, okay, I get it. We'll see. I'm just going to read that as being a little out of balance, and we'll just kind of talk about it in context. So this is pile 3. You chose Raphael. And your tarot card is the 4 of Wands. So I am going to read all of the cards and then talk about them in context. So the animal card that you got was the cardinal. The polarities of your spiritual pursuits and physical pleasures are out of balance, so do whatever is necessary to bring them back into equilibrium. And from the Poesis Oracle is Earth. Okay. So, with the 4 of Wands, the 4s are these invitations to create a container or to rest into a container. With the Wands, it feels like the container that is being created is play and ritual and creativity, and how to, like, I think of it as like, if you like set up a space when you were a kid that was like a fort, where when you went into the fort, your imagination came alive. Or maybe it was like, I liked to be in small spaces, like crawling into a closet or something. Or maybe it was a giant box that you got into, like, don't know if you've ever seen that SpongeBob episode where SpongeBob and Patrick get into the box and like all these worlds come to life. This is the kind of energy of the 4 of Wands, is like, what is the container where your creativity, where you get to play, where you get to create these imaginal realms of what is possible. And with these other cards, they're kind of an interesting connection. What's feeling like for the cardinal? Being out of balance, needing to come back into equilibrium with your spiritual pursuits and your physical pleasures. Sometimes we have habits or practices that are physical in nature, whether they are of excess or of deficiency. This could be utilizing a substance in excess, or being fully abstaining from something dietarily, or could be not moving your body at all, or moving your body too much, or like these are the kind of things I'm thinking of, like physical pleasures or even physical practices with how you want to be evolving and in relationship to yourself as a whole, to your soul journey, to your spirituality and your sense of evolution in the world. And it feels very much like there is a piece that is maybe like getting a ton of attention, and that the other ones are falling by the wayside. Especially with having this earth card, what comes to mind is like, sometimes when we think of and we move towards the spirituality ascension for people who are thinking about things like 5D and ascending from this carbon-based 3D matrix in whatever way that feels aligned for you. And if not, that's totally fine. I think this applies in other ways too. But when we think about that, sometimes there can be this reality of like spiritual bypassing, of utilizing ooh, okay. Of utilizing a spiritual framework as a way to negate or deny the realities of this dimension and this in reality and this identity, right? This is like saying we are all connected. We are all, we are all from the same energy. We are all from the same source, as a way to negate the realities of oppressive systems and oppressive narratives that create power and privilege and marginalization in the world. Those are not exclusive ideas, actually, but it's used to bypass that and to negate that, instead of to acknowledge that, yes, actually, that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that in the world that we live in, certain people in certain bodies and locations, Black people, Indigenous people, women, trans, non-binary folks, disabled people, exist in spaces of marginalization where they, just by virtue of who they are, receive less or receive more harm in the world. That is not, doesn't actually negate the fact that, like, yes, there is some sense of like, we're all human, right? We are all interconnected, but that has nothing to do with the fact that that other system exists. And so not wanting to utilize the spiritual aspect to bypass some of these earthly realities, while also not getting bogged down in those realities as the entirety of what we are up to here, right? Those both, like, I encourage you to feel into, if you picked this pile, right? When I see this as an out of balance energy, the Four of Wands, I think of how might you be needing containment for that imaginal realm so that you can integrate it, right? How can you see something as isolated? How can you go into a meditative space and feel the interconnectedness of all things, and then not lose sight of that when you leave that container and interact with others who are definitely having a different experience from you in the world? Right? And if you are in an experience where you're feeling like, well, yeah, I know that, but it's like, that's my entire experience. okay, well, how can you create containment where you get to tap in to your life and soul path and soul purpose outside of this material reality and liberate yourself from that in the ways that are possible without having that negate the fact that that is very much your experience in this world. Let's see what kind of like a hot tea type of situation. So I hope that you're still on board if you picked pile 3. It's an intensity. This is one we're dealing with a lot in this world, and it's a challenge. So let's see, 4 of Wands. I nourish and support my divine spark by creating space for my inherent creativity. I nourish and support my divine spark by creating space for my inherent creativity. So that's that play. That's creating that space, right? Carving that space out for inherent creativity. How does that support your sense of balance, right? How are your creative play practices supporting you in having balance between your physical reality and your spiritual truth? Raphael. Raphael has very angelic energy. And I think of the ways in which angelic energy can also be like messenger energy, can also be like bird energy. And there are some alignments between the idea that like Inanna or I have a guide who is named Ilona, and that there's some overlap between like the land of the dead and the like sky land of the birds, and how this kind of ascension is also a descent into like underworldly energy and the depths of our soul, and then expansiveness and internal expansiveness and external expansiveness are actually not so separate, that they are interconnected, and just kind of encouraging this, like how to be present with that messenger energy. How are our projections messengers for us of what we can, this is almost like a shadow work type of message, it feels like. And that sometimes that being out of balance and that need for containment is necessitating, like we need spaces that are safe and light and playful to be able to work with our shadow energy, to be able to work with that fragmentation that happens when perception gets distorted. Okay. I feel like those are the messages. Thanks for hanging in there, group 3. I hope that this was helpful for you. And for everyone, I hope that these messages felt nourishing to you. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with me. I would love to hear your feedback. If there's anything else that you'd like to see, anything else that would be helpful for you in these readings, I will let you know the timestamp of 1, 2, and 3 in the comments, and I will see you next week for another tarot reading. Also, if you're interested in more work with me, and are interested in working with dragons, I also wanted to let you know that I have a portal to dragon wisdom coming up. It is this Friday. It is a way where you get to, 1, have a guided meditation and connect with other dragon people. 2, you get to meet your dragon with, at least that's been people's experience during the guided meditation portion, and during your dreams around that space, you get a crystalline DNA activation in that space with your dragons. And then you get to ask me any questions you have about dragons as interdimensional beings. So if that's something you're interested in, check out the event on my website. Yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye.